Before I define the double empathy problem, let's talk about neurodiversity. The concept being that we all have different brains. We all have different brains that do things differently, that take in information through our senses, process, learn, think, communicate, experience the world differently. We all have unique patterns of strengths and challenges, which is why something called universal design, offering everything you do in multiple, flexible, different ways and giving people freedom and choice to pick what works best for them, that is best practice. Short of that, it's about designing accommodations and supports to meet people's needs. Unfortunately, in 2023, universal design is not present in most scenarios. And I'm sorry that somehow that text turned black. I feel the need to fix that from an accessibility standpoint. Okay, there we go. You know, when you import slides from other slides, things get all changed. Anyway, so what we know is that at least 1 in 5 brains learns, thinks, and or communicates differently than the so-called typical brain. I don't think there is such a thing as a typical brain, because I just showed you neurodiversity. We all do the things differently. But at least 1 in 5 people's brains work in such a way that significantly departs from the majority of brains, or the type of brain that society most usually caters to. And so some of us have specific, diagnostic labels: autism, ADHD, dyslexia, but many people do not. It's just that for those at least 1 in 5 people, our needs are less likely to be met by the defaults of society, and we may not know why. And the thing is, there is no one right way to think. There is no one right way to communicate. There is no one right way to experience the world. When my child was 5, she said this. I told her that I was about to go do a neurocultural competency training for professionals. She knows what that term means because she's been around this her whole life. And I said, what should I tell the people? Mama, tell them there's no right way to be a person. Yes, that's my sweet little love. So, all that being said, what is the double empathy problem? So the double empathy problem is a term coined by an autistic social scientist in the UK named Dr. Damian Milton. And what this comes from is repeatedly found in studies that autistic people communicate better with other autistic people, and non-autistic people communicate better with non-autistic people. And both groups fail in perspective taking when there's a mismatch between worldview, a mismatch of communication style. That's where communication breakdowns occur. So it's not that there is one normal type of communication skill and then there's like us autistic people. It's that it's this bi-directional difficulty with perspective taking. And when we think about those defaults in society, I think society does send the message that there is a default communication and a default way of seeing the world.
Just act in this way, communicate in this way, or you will go unheard. And not everybody can make that adjustment. And so those are the people that are staying away from healthcare because it's overwhelming or confusing or uncomfortable or unsafe to.
How this connects to access needs are that we all have access needs. Access needs are anything that is required to meaningfully participate in one's environment or community. And as I said, we all have them. This might be physical access needs, emotional, communication, so all different types of access needs. And so often we get the message that if we have needs, we are in some way needy, and explicitly or implicitly, often people get the message that we shouldn't have needs, that it's selfish to have needs. Like, that's not a thing, that's a myth. And that is really hard, because when we think about full participation in our world, in our lives, the social model of disability is about the barriers in the environment between the person and full participation. And it's not about there being something wrong with the individual. It's about those barriers being in place. And so we want to have as few barriers to full participation as possible. And when we think about how this plays out in interpersonal relationships, I'm going to play a little. I'm going to throw in a little excerpt from a brain club we did in January called "Everyone Flips Their Leg," where there's things that make us stress that are going to differ person to person and like context specific, like if there's something in the physical environment like a loud sound. If I'm like well hydrated and well rested, I might not be as stressed as if I'm, haven't done those things or have like a huge cognitive load or whatever, like with this business of the Zoom and the link and the whatever and all the switching between things. If a motorcycle drives by my house right now, I'm gonna flip my lid. Whereas like I might have been okay a couple hours ago. So when we get triggered, and borrowing from a model from Dr. Dan Siegel, Dr. Tina Queen Bryson from the Whole Brain Child, upstairs brain and downstairs brain. When downstairs brain gets triggered, we don't get to pick what triggers us. And sometimes we forget that we have interpersonal access needs. It's not just about sensory processing or like how we learn. It's about access needs in a relationship. What does it mean for downstairs brain to feel safe? And so when we think about, since we all have access needs, often those access needs conflict with.
If I may ease
No,
your...
you may not, and I think you should go. The party is over. Close the gates.
Yes, Your Majesty.
Elsa, no, wait! Give me my glove! Elsa, please! I can't live like this anymore! Then leave. What did I ever do to you? Enough, Anna. No, why? Why do you shut me out? Why do you shut the world out? What are you so afraid of? I said enough!
The family, the way that I return to regulation, the way that I can bring my nervous system back into reading other people's attunement, reading other people's nervous system, instead of being overwhelmed by my own, whatever it is going on. The best way for me to do that is to get down on the ground. Again, this is me, and this is experiments of years of knowing how to attune. For me, it's squatting down close. It's putting both my hands on the ground for a second, the floor. So I squat and I'm low. There's something about the proprioceptive work. Like I think because my glutes kick in so much, I'm like, oh, here's my body. And because I get into flexion, I'm like, oh, here I am. This is my contained little nervous system. Putting my hands on the ground feels strong. I feel like, yep, I am strong. I am a strong person. I can do this. So I'm building from the sensory system back into regulation. And I've practiced it enough over the years that I can do it fairly quickly in my nervous system. Those cues kick in safety for my neuroception. And it's subconscious. It is something our brains are always doing all the time. Scanning the environment, scanning the interrelationships, scanning the internal relationship, the internal environment for safety. And we are geared for it. So once we feel it, once we find it, it's what our system wants to go to. That homeostasis is where we want to be cellularly, right?
Yes.
Okay. So for my nervous system, it's that. It's getting low, it's getting grounded. It's softening my face, like actively saying, let your eyes soften. Don't create some expected emotion. So that shame, fear response might create this expected like, oh, I'm okay, right? Like, everything's fine. Can you tell this isn't really a smile? But it's what we do because it's what we've been socialized to do. So actively neutralizing, softening my face, And then like something about the environment for me usually helps. Find the horizon, look at a tree root, some sort of cue to me that's like, there's no saber-toothed tiger here. There's no gaping hole that's going to suck you into the hot molten lava of the middle of the earth. This is solid ground.
So you're describing that you begin with a bottom-up strategy. You get into your body and you ground yourself, whatever that means to you. You ground yourself, and then you have access to your cortex where you are cortically mediating your limbic response, because now you have access to your cortex because you did that initial bottom-up softening to take the edge off, to like bring your cortex back online, and then you go to that. I think a lot of people skip right to that, or they try to skip right to that, and they don't have access to their cortex, and you can't skip it. You have to do something to access your cortex. Yep. And there's an element of like when you're in the thick of it, even if you're like already screaming and like actively flipping your lid, you don't have access to the impulse control to stop.
This feeling of failure, like I'm having a hard time adulting, like as though there's right way to be an adult, or like, I'm having a hard time like paying my bills, or like I can't cook for myself. Anyway, like all these things that there's a lot of self-judgment and a lot of internalized ableism that goes on, because sometimes there's like this mythical narrative that being an adult means that you have a certain amount of executive functioning skills, as though like executive functioning equals adulting. I don't know if that resonates with anyone else, but that is a struggle for a lot of people. So I just want to name that for anyone in the audience who is feeling that today. Connie.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for having me. This is my first brain club, and I'm so glad to be part of this. And I guess let's just think what can I share with you without going on too long? So Mel, like give me the hook if I go on and on, because my brain is making lots of connections right now, and I'm kind of that like idea person where I'll just go off because I see all these connections. But I actually did that with Mel recently on a call, and everything that's being talked about today really comes together for me with the work that our team of resource coordinators do in Working Bridges through United Way's workplace-based team, both on a it was like a supervisor level, like working with our team and the people that show up to do the work of being a resource coordinator in very diverse workplaces. Resource coordinators go to workplaces to work with employees that are within specific companies, and they go to companies that are essential jobs. So these are kinds of jobs where many job functions that are in these companies don't have remote capabilities. Even through COVID and some of the initial challenges that we faced, where we work with employees that have to show up to their job, in manufacturing settings and healthcare settings. And so I think a lot about neuro-inclusion and diversity of how our brains work as far as how the resource coordinators do their work, because we have lots of different tools available to us, but not everybody works with those tools in the same way or wants those tools in their job. I think about it just from an organizational perspective. United Way of Northwest Vermont had the chance to connect with Mel through our staff training and start to really think about how does this happen? How does neuro inclusion impact our workplace and our work styles and the way we show up fully at work? So that's one perspective. But then I also see in our workplaces where we provide resource coordination, so with the employers that we work with, this feels sort of cutting edge, and it's kind of interesting because I think many of you here, you've been talking about this for some time, the work, but employers aren't, this hasn't really been discussed. I don't think employers have had the chance to even have some frame around this or have some understanding about what this means and how they can look at jobs and look at individual needs and really see where options can be, where flexibility can be. One of my teammates met with an employee at a manufacturing company who was feeling really frustrated and like really undervalued in their work, and disclosed to the resource coordinator, who's a confidential support, that they're a person on the autism spectrum and that what they really want to do is organize that darn warehouse. But they're in a completely different position that's not really like speaking to them, right? It's not grabbing the way they want to work, right? And so I think there's so much stigma still that employees come to their resource coordinator and will share these things, and yet they don't feel safe sharing with their employer.
I didn't get my autism diagnosis until I was like 54 years old. That meant that I spent most of my life, I'm 55, 56 now, I forget, but I've spent way more of my life not knowing that I was autistic in a neurotypical environment than I have knowing that I am neurotypical. And unfortunately, because of where the lack of information comes regarding neurodiversity, the complex PTSD that I have actually is as a result predominantly of my employment scenarios. So some of the stuff I'm going to share isn't going to be really happy stuff, and I'm sorry about that, but it's also real, and I'm also not super sorry about that. So the first question was, what kinds of access needs do you have at work? I wrote down a couple notes about executive functioning and organization. I want to give an example of how the company came in, had a consultant come in, was working with us all for things on like organization and things like that. At that point, I had been in the business for 25, 30 years. I was holding high-level professional roles and I couldn't manage things. And all of the suggestions that were given were neurotypical suggestions. They're all the ones that you find in the books. They're all the ones that I had tried before, and none of them worked for me because they weren't built for my brain. But unfortunately, what winds up happening is I just came off like I was resistant to any kind of help because the help that I was getting wasn't actually conducive to the problems I was trying to solve. The problem was nobody knew that I was autistic at that time. Another thing that came into play regarding access needs is top-down processing. Clem, you were talking about working different hours. I can't work when there's sound around me. I can't block out that sound. And so I would go into the office at 6 o'clock when it was quiet, work until it was 9, not be able to get anything done between 9 and 4 o'clock with interruptions. And then I would work until 7, 8, 9 o'clock every day. And I wound up getting fired in spite of unprecedented results because they needed somebody who could do the job in 40 hours a week. I was on salary, so it cost them nothing more. And I was putting in the time and getting unprecedented industry results. And fundamentally, what wound up happening is I wound up getting kicked out of the company for political reasons. They used 360-degree reviews, and fundamentally, none of the people who were reviewing me were actually qualified to review me. So that's just a little bit about the access. I don't want to go on too long, but the part about making it hard to communicate the access needs really comes down to the fact that 3% of the research that goes into autism goes into adult autism as opposed to pediatric autism. I've been declined from medical services because the physician or the therapist doesn't know what to do with me. If the therapist or the physician doesn't know what to do with me, how can I expect the employers to know what to do with me? If the scientists aren't doing the research to inform me what help I need, how can I be informed to help an employer be informed as to what kind? So it turns into like this vicious circle. The last thing I want to address, and I'll make this really, really quick. about how the concepts of access needs and perspective taking play out in the workplace. The one thing I want to note is because most people make an assumption that everybody else is neurotypical. They do not have it in their thought constructs that, oh, this person might be autistic, this person might be neurodivergent. And so what happens when some of our neurodivergent features like rigidity or pathological demand avoidance show up, those kinds of features are often conflated as personality traits when they're actually hurdles that we are trying to get over in order to do our job and get the results that the company expects us to get. So that's my kind of little brief, and thank you.
Thank you, Zeph. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I here on the State House, so many people nodding their head along while you were speaking. Connie.
Zeph, what you just said made me think of something I just wanted to share. I think, oh, there goes my hand. Sorry, I was like, my hand's still up. Where's my hand? But what you just said, I saw this happen in a workplace there was an employee that came to meet with me as a resource coordinator, right? So the employee came in, was crying and clearly really escalated and, really upset by their supervisor on a production line, having yelled at them to do the job and do something a certain way. And so they came to me and they disclosed that they had experienced a lot of trauma and having been previously incarcerated, and that they were experiencing that flight, fight, kind of that just the flood. You could tell that person in it, but that team lead, that supervisor, essentially that was a trigger, right? That person triggered that. And so the supervisor team lead, this is days later, I came to find out the company let that employee go. And what I have come to learn since, what I think happened there, and I don't know for sure, but what I think was happening is the team lead and the company, perceived that employee, had that perception, right? That idea that, this person just being difficult, not following the rules, and, creating this problem.
Yep.
When I know, because I got to talk to that person, I recognize, no, that what's happening right now is the way a person's communicating is triggering your brain to go somewhere else. Your brain's not here at work, right?
Right.
But that team lead who, wasn't supported to approach that situation with those types of tools or with that thinking, right? We hadn't set that team lead up to be able to communicate in a way that would really have de-escalated the situation. It could have made that work totally differently. That I will never forget, because I knew what was happening, but the company didn't have any steps or any practice or any support for the employees that are in it day to day, right?
Right.
Yeah, and if I could also point out, because Connie, what you're really reminding me of is you're really like a cultural broker. You are an interpreter, where you are taking what you've seen, the communication, the nonverbal communication that you have perceived, and you're now translating it or interpreting it through a lens of understanding nervous system regulation. And it is not, it's not a common practice that we can even identify when people are dysregulated. So like when I do trainings on neuro-inclusive employment, that is the first thing I do. It's what I do for you guys, because I think if we see overtly flipping their lid and throwing things, like we can maybe recognize that's not a calm person right now, but that's not the only manifestation of dysregulation. So if somebody is, the tone of voice, the flood of ideas, the pace of speech, the rapid pace, like there's all different ways that a nervous system manifests dysregulation. And so like I think, one of the most helpful steps for an employer
to like be investing in neuro-inclusive culture is to get some training around recognizing dysregulation in your employees and not attributing things to like a conscious cortical, like, yeah, I really thought this out and I thought this was the way I was going to handle this. Like, this is limbic, involuntary, automatic responses dysregulation.
And so I think the issue is that these things are not on people's radar, that because it's not being taught in school.
Right. So let's start there. So what do you remember, if anything, about what you were taught about autism and ADHD?
Nothing. I had no idea they could coexist.
Yeah. I was never taught that they could coexist.
Yeah.
Despite
Yeah.
they almost like they coexist more often than they don't.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like for me, autism education was like developmental milestones and MChat and that type of stuff for kids. And then ADHD was, this happens in kids and we use stimulants to treat it. And then
Yeah, they
that,
were
like,
they were separate.
I mean, I was not taught that autistic physiology was different than non-autistic people's physiology. Like I was taught, I mean, like, so, I mean, there was like, so, you know, the deficit-based paradigm of like, you know, here are the things that are wrong. And we call this autism. In kids, there was never a discussion about autistic adults. I don't know, like, I don't think that I had any ideas about autistic adults, despite being one and not knowing. But like like it was just never on the radar that like there were autistic adults, let alone the medical conditions that people have. So like when the list of all the co-occurring conditions, these are all things that kids had. There was also like, you know, the medical conditions that all the autistic kids had. It was very strongly implied, if not explicitly taught to me, that it was like patient blaming, you know, like you have gastrointestinal things because you only eat chicken nuggets and pasta and you don't exercise, so that's why you're constipated. Like, not that you have stretchy colons that get all stretched out.
right, increased periodontal disease because of not doing oral hygiene.
Right.
I mean, and this is more systemic, right, in the healthcare system, but the zoomed in style of teaching, like, you know, there's psychiatry and there's gastroenterology and there are all these things that are separated, but in reality, there are so many things that are interconnected that it's silly that we're not taught more of a like zoomed out picture. This is like an entire being that has multiple systems that actually work together and rely on each other.
I think that's what primes primary care providers for doing this type of work, is because theoretically they're the ones who are already doing that kind of like look at the full body and the full patient, and they're the ones who are seeing all the different things that are going on and know the patient longitudinally enough to theoretically be able to kind of see the connection between everything.
But what I would say is that even though we have a population of clinicians who are ideally poised to spot the pattern, we have a medical system, a healthcare system that is thwarting primary care clinicians to have full access to their cortex, right? Like, so we have this healthcare system that is forcing primary care clinicians to see, you know, a patient every 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes. And
most practices are 15-minute visits for follow-ups, 30-minute visits for new patients, or, you know, wellness exams or whatever. And on top of that, you're managing an electronic medical record system and paperwork and interpersonal work stuff. It's like you have 5 or 10 jobs within one job already. And so I don't want to, there's no, the blame is the system. I don't think that people go into medicine intentionally wanting to dismiss people at all, but it's something that ends up happening. You know, you're exhausted, you're tired, you didn't eat breakfast, you didn't have time to eat lunch, and then you lose what's it called? You get dysregulated. There's a line that happens, and you're like backed up against a wall and feel like you know, in some ways it may be the provider kind of advocating for their own access needs by saying, okay, we don't have time to talk about this today, but not knowing that's how that makes someone feel.
You don't have the cognitive resources to do what needs doing in that moment because the system is thwarting you. And so you don't have the ability in that moment to zoom out, because that's an executive function. It's like a higher order brain skill to zoom out, to self-monitor, to know like what you're saying, how you're saying, your tone, your body language, all of this stuff. And I think that there's a lot of, really inadvertent communication breakdowns that
unintentional dismissiveness.
Yeah. I think like what I hear a lot, like when we have new patients, the overwhelming majority of our patients have this pattern, right, of neuroimmune conditions, that there is physiology that explains these multi-organ system symptoms. People show up and they have like this laundry list of diagnoses, and like, why would it make sense that a human being would have like 40 things wrong with them? Turns out, their connective tissue is different. It's just a different way of being wired. And it just so happens that these physical health conditions, which, are exacerbated by dysregulation. And when your access needs are thwarted by like, all of the systems, this actually drives like a worsening of neuroimmune conditions. But people don't know that. Nobody knows that. They just like feel broken and they're told that they are broken, and then they're like shamed for seeking help. So like, anyway, shamed for seeking help, shamed for seeking help in the way that you authentically communicate when you seek help, and shamed for not complying with recommendations that don't work for your brain.
Right.
When we hear their story, they can trace this back for like decades, right? Like decades.
Yeah.
And it's about having the opportunity to share your story in the way that works for you. So some people need to info dump their story with mouth words. Some people need to
bring a list.
Yeah, right. They're the patient with the list, right? The one that's like shamed and othered by the healthcare system. They wrote that list, and that list is incredibly important because it has all the information in it. Like, anyway, there's some people like, we have a patient who I'll never forget, new patient visit, brought a mind map that showed me like, all the things that like, this makes it worse, this makes it better. And I'm like, I know that pattern, right? So like, if you get the patient's information in like their, so say like in their native tongue, like in the way that they best communicate, you get a ton more information, but the system thwarts patients from communicating.
The people come in. I think the other thing that I often see, especially with kids coming in with neurodivergent kids, especially, is just that they have not been able to access care in other settings, just due to the like sensory overload of the specific setting. And so whether it's like providers not knowing their sensory needs beforehand, before actually coming into the visit, or like just before walking into the room.
Totally.
Whether it's like the fluorescent lights, whether it's thinking that they're going to need a vaccine the entire visit and being anxious and not interacting the entire visit until they know they don't need one at the end. And that's why I like having the like information before a visit of what somebody needs, what their sensory needs are, because starting off the visit that way makes such a huge difference. And if we didn't have that, I wouldn't know necessarily.
Well, you left something out. How do we have that information? We asked, right? Like that's the thing, right? So if you ask people what makes them comfortable, and you ask and like you try to do those things, they usually have a better healthcare experience.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just the systems within the systems already have like there's their standard expectation. Like, this is how you communicate, this is how you take information. Like, people teach you how to take notes. Like when you're in school, here's how you study something without ever knowing how your brain works.
Part of the, a huge part of the problem is simply that there's a giant percentage of the adult population that has no idea that there's that neurodiversity is so common. And so, and I say that including myself, right? Mel said to me a long time ago, what do you think happens to all those kids who were diagnosed with this when they were little? They turn into adults. And we just don't learn anything about that. And it's not just physicians, it's like everybody, right? So there is so little knowledge and therefore interest in getting an interpreter or being an interpreter. The other thing I'm thinking though is there are certain, I mean, you can tell me what you think about this, but there are certain kinds of jobs where being regulated is a necessity. You can't just accommodate everything for every job.
I love that you're bringing that up. So two things I would say. So one is the idea is that many times when people are dysregulated, it would be helpful to like wonder why. Why are you dysregulated? And so like to prevent dysregulation. So when I think back to my medical training, I can think, when I can think back to like being a resident and like breaking down, like crying in the resident call room, it was always in the context of my computer doing something terrible to me that was like really interfering with my ability to do my job. I had no idea that I had visual processing and visual motor differences. I had no idea. I just knew that I felt terrible and I was flipping my lid about it. Like this happens all the time, these like subtle ways in which the environment and the bandwidth tax depletes one's nervous system. And so like the idea would be that we should all know about our brains so that we can design a life that's meant for our brain. Like I didn't know about assistive technology until I was 37 years old. It made a huge difference. Now my 5-year-old has already had an assistive technology console. Like this is what happens when you can learn about your brain. You have incredible power offered to you. And the most important thing is to not internalize a narrative of being broken and defective. Like, yeah, this is a thing. This like Zoom, it's so hard to work it. It's not my fault. It's the way the program was designed. So like that subtle shift makes a huge difference, over someone's lifespan. Because what I would say to Zeph's point about, or actually I'll also just to add on directly to Rachel's point about, autistic or, otherwise neurodivergent kids become neurodivergent adults. We have, here at All Brains Belong, we have, almost 200 neurodivergent adults who were not identified as children. You know, the people that come to our practice may or may not, you know, be neurodivergent or identify as neurodivergent, but by and large, the people come here because their needs were not met by the traditional healthcare system, and we're offering something different. And in so doing, what many, not all, but many people have in common is that, you know, growing up with a brain that thinks, learns, or communicates differently than that so-called typical brain, whatever that means, is that there's just a lot of internalized ableism and just like impact on agency and self-esteem and self-concept from being told explicitly or implicitly that there's something wrong with you and that there's something broken about you, when that's not true. It was a brain rule, it was a package, it was a myth that's been fed to so many people, you know, from you know, infancy, toddlerhood onwards, like the myth that there's a right type of brain. Like, we tell toddlers that, like, you know, this is how you play. You can't just play the same thing over and over again. That's pathological. Like, play is the pursuit of joy. Like, who are we to, you know, like, that makes no sense. But yet that's what kind of goes on. That's the narrative. Go ahead. Hold on, I want to give you a microphone. Here you go. Oh, cool. Yeah, you got your own microphone. Here you go.
I think I think we're up against something that's bigger than just sort of informing people about, like, and getting people to buy into the idea of that there are access needs, and that it would be really great if there were sort of a universal design or a universal design approach. Because when I think about the cultural context in which people come into employment, first of all, I mean, this is the means for me to make a living and support my family. So already anybody who's like needs to be in the job market is stressed about their employment. So they're coming in that fight. So they already have their fight flight stuff going up in arms when it comes to retaining employment. So if someone else gets an advantage, that you know, if all of a sudden that pool of potential employees becomes larger, that's a scary thing for the people who are already even the neurotypical people who are like, wait, this is my pool, now somebody else is getting an advantage. And also you've got not only that, but you've got the companies that are in competition with each other, and they're in fight flight with each other. So we have a whole culture where employment is a fight flight thing that's sort of bringing out the worst of us, as far as how we each secure our own private little advantages, our own little advantage nooks, rather than how we open access and share resources. And so I don't know how to deal with that, but I think we're coming into something that has to be that is better recognized and addressed intentionally as a part of, like, how do we make this better for everybody in a way that and how do we make clear the impact that the stress is having on everybody, that it's like the way that we're doing employment right now is bad for everybody, so it would be good for us to begin to change.
You can pass the microphone to Matt. And I would say that, I mean, this is an opportunity to zoom out and say, the way that we're doing a lot of things in society is not working for a lot of people. The way we're doing healthcare, the way that we're doing education, the way that we're doing employment, like, it's like, and this is the work that we're trying to take on here at All Brains Belong, in terms of like can we zoom out and reimagine what's possible? Because, like, this not working.
So one of the things that I just noticed on that video that I remember from real life was there was someone on the lawn who was texting to the Zoom chat, and we read it out loud. Like, it was such a beautiful capturing of, like, what goes on here, of creating spaces for people to show up however they're most comfortable and just show up authentically.